right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sikivu again, and I know that we're winding down our afternoon, but I think this is a very appropriate topic, given that there has been so much crisis, trauma, and anxiety that we've all experienced in these globally apocalyptic conditions. And so who better to address these issues from a culturally responsive, unapologetically Black womanist and feminist perspective than these two amazing visionaries up here that I've had the privilege to work with in different capacities. The first is Candace Gorham, and Candace is an author, an all-around badass. We're going to unpack her bio in a second. And Suandria Hall, who is also a therapist and all-around badass. And I had the opportunity to work with Suandria in our Standing for Black Girls Wellness Initiative, which really came out of the pandemic. A lot of what we're going to be discussing today concerns all of the disparities that communities of color, specifically African-American and African descent women and girls and gender expansive folk have been experiencing as a result of the apartheid conditions that have intensified during the pandemic. So just a little background on the Standing for Black Girls Initiative. This was something that came out of some data that was collected by two students of mine, 10th grade and 11th grade students at King Drew Magnet High School in South LA, which has the distinction of having one of the highest four-year college going rates in the LAUSD, which is the second largest school district in the nation. And King Drew is right smack dab in the middle of South Central in Compton and has an exemplary STEM program, which most folks don't know about because most folks, of course, associate South LA and South Central with ghettoization, with criminalization, with chaos. And so King Drew is really a shining monument to Black excellence and to Black progressive resistance in culturally responsive education and mental health care. Because certainly culturally responsive education, which lifts up the lived experiences, the social capital, the cultural knowledge, and the social history of communities of color, is foundational to mental health care. And so we're going to get into that in a second. I wanted to frame this in terms of the feminist perspective. So I'm going to have Candace and Suandria talk a little bit about their backgrounds as on-the-ground practitioners working with diverse communities, and specifically, I know in Suandria's instance, working with humanist and secular communities, and tackling this issue of intersectionality and cultural competence and how that is a form of politicized resistance. We want to think about what Audre Lorde has said about self-care being a radical form of resistance. It is politicization. It is not just self-indulgence coming from a Black African descent perspective where we have been victimized and dehumanized by misogynoir, anti-Black misogyny, and white supremacy, and racial capitalism, and Jim Crow segregation to de facto segregation. All of those things are part of our complex of generational trauma. And so how do we thrive in that context? And how do we connect to practitioners like these powerful women? Because a primary impetus of Standing for Black Girls was the fact that Black girls who were survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence did not have access to practitioners from their lived experience and their backgrounds and their communities. And so that's part of the trauma. Yeah? Okay. All right, Candace.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Candace, and I'm an author, and I've written a couple of books, and they're on sale in the lobby. And but as far as my mental health experience, thank you. As far as my mental health experience, I've been in the field since 2006, and so I've done everything from, in-home therapy, office therapy. I was the clinical director at an all-boys group home for a period of time. I've been I was a supervisor over the outpatient therapy department at another agency. I helped open offices in other cities. I've done everything from, like I said, just the regular day-to-day, mental health assessments all the way to what does it take to open an office and set it up and get it contracted with Medicaid and get it contracted with the local MCO, so I've kind of got a wide range of experience in that area. Is that, you just want us to talk about our background? Okay, all right, so I'll pass on you.
Oh, I got it, I think. Can y'all hear me? Hi, good afternoon. I'm Suandria, and Candace, we're talking earlier how we kind of high-five each other as our careers kind of swapped a little bit. I've spent 25 plus years in the healthcare field, and more recently entered the mental health arena. Have done coaching for a number of years, and with my own kind of deconversion from religion, I felt like the resources weren't there to support me in that change. It was so big. I didn't expect the amount of grief and pain and isolation and loneliness that I experienced leaving Christianity. So I wanted to be a resource that I wanted. So went back to school, got my master's in clinical mental health, and I'm in private practice with a focus on life transitions and religious trauma.
And so what role has intersectionality played in your practice and working with BIPOC communities across sexuality and across lived experience?
Yeah, let me do Dr. Crenshaw some justice in even kind of defining intersectionality, at least in my mind. We are more than one thing, right? And so me, I'm a Black woman, I'm a mother, I'm a partner, I'm a humanist, I am over 45, I'm a lot of things, right? And so these markers they define and they invite different life experiences. So while I may have something in common with a room full of, for example, white women, we are women. So there are some things that we experience in the very same way. But then when you couple that with being a Black woman, my road veers off, right? So that looks a little different. And that is an important part to remember in the mental health arena. The stressors that I have to manage are going to look different, right? So it's not one size, one fit all. Candace, you could probably attest to this. In grad school, the book's this thick, but then the blurb's this thick on, a Black experience, and it's just not enough information. And so that intersectionality became something for me that I had to dig around and find for myself, right? And then connect to my lived experience, the women I do life with, right? Because we're not at the forefront of even in education. So again, those markers, those different race and gender and ethnicity, they bring a very special, unique level of stressors that aren't always apparent.
So I would define intersectionality similarly as well. I kind of have a visual in my head when I think about it. And I think about like a Venn diagram, but I imagine, somebody used the hula hoop analogy earlier today. I imagine hula hoops. And so where all of these Venn diagram circles overlap, right in the middle, somewhere in the middle, they all overlap, right? And that's me. I'm in the middle of all these hula hoops that are overlapping. This is me in the middle. But all of these other little pieces of the hula hoop coming off, they're still parts of my identity, and maybe they overlap with another hula hoop over here, and they're all parts of me. But I'm right in the middle where it all overlaps is me. And so that's kind of how I visually imagine intersectionality. I would say, as far as how it has influenced my work, or how I think about cultural competency. You mentioned that at the beginning, and cultural competency to me is not just about being competent of other cultures, about other cultures, right? Being knowledgeable about other cultures. When I was going through grad school, that's what cultural competency was like. This is what you need to go know about this population of people, and this is what you need to know about this population, and this. And now you're culturally competent because you know about all these populations. And so, of course, I don't see it that way. And the definition really has begun to change and get more nuanced and a little bit more heft to it, in that it's not just about what I know about you. It's also, what do I know about me? What do I know about my own culture? What do I know about my own identity? Do I know about my own intersections? And how does that show up in the therapy session? So how does my being how would my being an atheist impact my ability to work with a Jehovah's Witness? Or how would my being, radical feminist, all of your words, atheist, lesbian, all of these things, how would that impact me if I'm sitting across from a super macho, Latino male that don't know, how do I bring myself and all of my bits and pieces of my hula hoop identities? How does that show up in the therapy session? How do I let that influence me? How do I police myself? So it's a whole lot of cultural competency to me is about what you know about yourself and how you apply your skills and yourself in your session so that you can meet those diverse populations where they are. And I look at, where does my hula hoop overlap with your hula hoop? And then that's what I'm gonna connect with you on, is where our hula hoops overlap. And then we can expand from there, and I can expand from there as a therapist to other realms. But I gotta connect with you first. And I kind of search my little circle of hula hoops and go, what do we have? What do we have? What do we have? Okay, boom, I can connect with you because, you got on a pink thing and I got on a pink thing, whatever, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's really an antidote to the typical hierarchical white objectivist rationalist. There is this universal standard of subjectivity that we're going to apply to mental health care. That is the antithesis of that kind of mentality. And so I wanted to highlight a quote, actually two quotes from the Combahee River Collective, which was the seminal Black feminist socialist 1970s collective that originated in New York as a counterpoint, as a means of redressing white supremacy in the feminist movement and anti-Black misogyny in the civil rights and the Black power movements. And Sam, can we let next slide? Thanks. So this is the lead quote from Alice Walker, actually, from many of you may be familiar with her anthology, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. She says, Black women are called the mules of the world because we have been handed the burdens that everyone else refused to carry. We have been called matriarchs. We have been called superwomen and mean and evil bitches, not to mention castrators and sapphires and mamas. When we have pleaded for understanding, our character has been distorted. When we have asked for love, we have been given children. To be an artist and a Black woman, even today, lowers our status in many respects rather than raises it. And so she wrote that in 1974. Here we are decades later, and it still resonates powerfully in terms of our lived experiences, cultural competence, and intersectional dynamics. The next slide is from the Combahee River Collective, named after, well, who knows who the Combahee River Collective was named after, or rather what specific historical incident it was named after, and who spearheaded that historical incident? I saw a hand raise. Yeah, so it was a battle that Harriet Tubman won during the Civil War era, and she liberated over 700 enslaved Africans. So they named themselves after that seminal battle. They said, no one will save us but ourselves. This is a humanist statement too. In the case of Black women, this is a particularly repugnant, dangerous, threatening, and therefore revolutionary concept, because it is obvious from looking at us, at all the political movements that have preceded us, that no one, anyone is more worthy of liberation than ourselves. We reject pedestals, we reject queenhood, and walking 10 paces behind. To be recognized as human, levelly human, is enough. 1977.